but to the government and the people of Barbados, the people including all levels of people, that we are still able in those circumstances to gain the goodwill and the confidence of the financial world. The second reason why I think that this particular exercise is commendable, it is because at this stage, where Barbados has not been able to attract any concessionary rates, that we are still able to have a lower rate for a loan of this sort, and especially where that loan is supporting an industry which by and large nobody in the Caribbean has any confidence in. I don't say that nobody should have confidence in, but I say that judging from Trinidad back to Belize, that we are in a position to recognize that sugar, since the European countries of the world have again found beet sugar attractive, we have not been able any longer to attract a price, to attract partners, or to attract any business relationships that would lend to any sustainable relationships insofar as they treat with the sugarcane industry and with the price of sugar. I think this might be a useful time for me to say that we have been very conscious of this particular dilemma that sugar faces, we in the labor movement, and I say we because I have had the privilege, the distinct honor and privilege for what I must confess to be now close on 50 years. I don't look that young, but I have to confess that I've been spending a long time, the first bit at the feet of the Gamaliel of the labor movement, Right Excellent Frank Walcott, and then thereafter on my own feeble legs as I have attempted to work in this particular field. And I would wish it to be known that labor has always been very supportive of the sugar industry, even at the same time that we found it to be perhaps the most exploitative of employer agencies in the country. And we've always had to deal with that particular contradiction, and we have sought not to throw out the baby simply because the bathwater was not palatable or not acceptable. In that connection, therefore, I would wish to make a brief comment. I'm not going to take the full afternoon on this, on a comment which was made by one of my colleagues, my neighbor as well, particularly regarding our approach to sugar, starting with 1963 and the windfall issue. A lot of people, Madam President, may not know that in 1963, at the time of the windfall, that the idea of being able to fund that special amount of money that came out of sugar was put forward to the government by the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union at the time, Right Excellent Sir Frank Walcott, as we know today. And that proposal found support with the Premier of the country at the time, Honorable Errol Barrow, gave support to it. But in Barbados, it raised such a ruckus. There was so much opposition to it by the opposition party of the day and by the planters of the country, the sugar industry owners themselves, that in fact, Sir Frank had to be escorted around Barbados by police. And Errol Barrow reached the position where he sent Walcott a note saying, I did the best I could. Every man got a break for himself from here on. I can't help you, So I'm going to have to take my political position, and you are going to have to treat that one how you want to. A position in which people wanted to take their windfall money, and some people went and bought fridges which were too big to get in the house. Couldn't get through the house. Bought things on the advice of the same planter because they were planters and then they were distributors in Bridgetown. And put those people in a position where the Barbados Workers Union then had to lead subsequently delegations to have special funds for sugar workers on their retirement. And we are in a position today where we are still getting crumbs for sugar workers who otherwise would have had a fund, multi-million dollar fund out of that windfall issue. And that did not only destroy the sugar workers as a body of persons, it also destroyed the sugar industry, because that money properly funded would have been able to carry the sugar industry through the difficult times that followed. The story very often gets told, but sometimes it gets lost in the translations and the times forward. Just as I said to my friend before, another such statement that might get lost and misunderstood is the Earl Barrack Blade statement. Now, I am not involved in politics. I am not a politician, Madam President, so you must forgive me. But I think that statement is the most misunderstood and the most mistranslated statement that there is in the socio-political life and economic life of this country. Honorable Rabar was Prime Minister, was leader of the country, was an economist, understood that we had thousands of people who had small farms, who had attachments to agriculture in one way or the other, and who therefore could not in the foreseeable future not have canes. And even though his understanding was that an acre of canes employed less people than an acre in an industry, it could not have been understood that this was anything other than a political comment that was intended to get across a different message. But I'm not going to spend time on it because I am not there to make up the case for those people who will be in the Huskins very shortly, if they are not now in those said Huskins. I merely want to say the statement that we need to be careful that when politicians make public statements, that we are not in a position to take them and relate them or translate them or transmogrify them in such a manner that they do not have any relevance or bear any relationship to what we know is the stark reality of the environment in which we are living. We today, even today, recognize that sugarcane is part of the foreseeable future of Barbados. And nobody, however enlightened we may be, should speak to this unless we get some divine guidance. But you don't get that unless you get a second person to be able to give you the witness. Because if you send a prophet without there being any assurance of that prophecy, then you will not be heard. The reality is that all of us who speak today recognize that sugar is still part of the foreseeable future of this country and will be for many, many eons to come. And that is why beyond 1963, even beyond the time where labor was made to run and hide, as it were, why we were subsequently able to approach whoever was the government of the day and to make out a case for sugar. Senator Boyce, as part of the private sector, was able to speak and can testify to our approaches in the recovery program of 1992. He was speaking for the employers, And he knows that the Barbados Workers Union was very much in the forefront of the argument that whatever was happening in Barbados, time and effort and money had to be given into sugar to maintain the viability of sugar and to give us the opportunity to safeguard and to protect the livelihood and the jobs of those thousands of people who then still were in the industry, although the numbers were reduced significantly. And I would just need to have it recognized that even sometimes where the industry itself, perhaps they did not have the confidence that they would be heard, even though the industry itself did not come forward always to make out its case. I can tell you, Madam President, that the labor leaders of the day were the people who were pushing the case for the industry. Not necessarily because we were sugar planters, but because we realized that the welfare of the country, the well-being of all the sectors in the economy was tied up in the well-being of the sugar industry. And that was so in 1991, 92 more so. But it was so again as recently as 2014, 2015, when, and I can speak to this as I could speak to 1992, when we in the labor movement approached Prime Minister Stewart and Minister Eswick, as well as Minister Sinclair, in an effort to make sure that the industry, in commencing the harvesting season, would be given not only the money to start the season, but be given additional funding to ensure that it would be able to start the preparation period for the subsequent crop and be able to get funding, as they intimated, to increase the area for production, as they had indicated, by about 50%. And you can imagine that that increase in the amount of arable land that would have been given over to sugar production, that would have been land bringing back the levels of annual harvesting to 50%, perhaps more than that, of what in fact had become a very low and a sadly low level of sugar production in this country. I agree with Senator Adams that we need to see our production levels back up to better, much better levels. We believe it can happen, and there are many of us who have been seeking to encourage the industry to do that. One of their biggest problems was pre-deal larceny. I believe the government has been trying to deal with that. I believe that other people have to work together in dealing with that, including the industry itself. But we have to find ways and means by which we will be able to bring the industry to a position where much more and much better can be done. But of course that raises the question, Madam President, is whether the private sector wants to control sugar. And that is, I think, the point that Senator Watson was hinting at or speaking to. I'm not sure which is the right word, he would have to correct me. And that raises a very serious question. Are the owners of the land, are the promoters of the industry ready to assume greater levels of personal responsibility? And I've been present at meetings where that challenge has been put out and where the answer is not straightforward. And I would not be one to blame anybody if there's a certain level of hesitancy in that matter, because there's a significant amount of capital that has to go into sugar production long before reaping time comes. And given our current economy, that is going to take a lot of courage, and it's going to take a lot of support, either upfront or support behind the scenes. About 4 years ago, the industry, I think, had a plan and had a financial backer. I cannot tell you now, since I'm not as prominently positioned as I was, what is the state of play in that regard. But I know that it would be a very difficult thing for the industry to be restored to the level that it is in need of being restored. It would be difficult if government does not play a significant role. And I, for one, would want to insist that that government role be not downgraded, because far too much has to be gained by the country by having the government play that role, although there is not always any immediate evidence of positive monetary or economic benefits to the administration. So whoever the government, or whatever the circumstances, sugar cane and cane sugar must maintain the level of prominency that it has maintained in the past. Having said that it should maintain that prominence, I wish to argue that that would be where the industry then picks up in a deficit environment, because sugar lands are very sadly neglected. And in my inexpert view, even where the lands are under sugar production for this current harvest season, in some areas the land does not look as though the level of culture, the level of care that was required did in fact take place. And where that is so, I don't believe you can blame any government. So we have to see that where the land is not in production, there has been all kinds of unfortunate and some nefarious exercises or results that we have had to experience. One of them is the indiscriminate, inconsiderate dumping that we as Barbadian people have been entering into. Wherever the unthinking and the unconscionable will see an open space of land, they will believe that that is the answer to their wish for a shortcut, and they will dump whatever it is, be it an old building, be it old furniture for their house, old appliances, you name it, they will dump it. And in some cases, even though it may be unhealthy, they will dump it even in the St. Lawrence swamp. This is totally unacceptable. And we have, when we start looking at people that we want to pull down, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to make sure that there's a pull-up element in the chains that there are in the country? And this has nothing to do with a political party or who the government is going to be. We are thinking, as I said on one time recently, we are thinking of the soup. We are all involved in having that soup simmering in the pot. And we all have to recognize that that pot and the soup in that pot is a pot for the nation. And if we choose to dump indiscriminately into the pot, bear in mind that we have to drink the soup. So indiscriminate dumping or whatever other negative matter that we are dealing with, we have to stop, pull up our socks and say, let us understand, if not for ourselves, let us think of our children, or let us adopt a child if we haven't got any of our own, and therefore let us think to the future. The unsightliness of this dumping is a major problem. But another problem, because we are not properly culturing our land and looking after it, is that there's a resultant problem of all kinds of dangerous offshoots. Some living, some not so living. The living ones are the rodents, Well, you would get that even if they were canes, so I wouldn't use that alone. But the bigger one I wish to speak of is the awful problem of the proliferation of cow-itch and other similar kinds of diseases and irritants that there are in land that is not being properly looked after. I would like to believe that by now, Madam President, we so educated as we are, we so forward-thinking as we are, we so able to create things as we are, we ought to have been able to find something that properly addresses the awful problem of the cow-itch and either reduces it or finds a way to treat with it at an earlier level on the land in such a way that we don't have this awful problem of one school and then another school and the possibility of other schools that may have to close their doors because of this insidious problem of the cow-itch. Nor should we have the problem where, as I was dealing with this morning, we have problems of supervisors and managers. In some places, I will not wish to call the name of those properties, where people are sent improperly prepared to treat with the correction of the cow-itch, while the supervisors themselves refuse to go anywhere near it. It is a problem that Barbados has to be aware of, a problem for which I will not name anyone, but a problem that has to make people aware that no longer in Barbados we are able to enjoy a situation where you can tell somebody, do as I say, if you're not prepared to demonstrate that you are prepared to do the same thing that you're instructing to have done. Now, on another level, the question of energy was raised and the matter of how that energy will relate to the industry. And I noted very well that Senator Boyce spoke about how that energy problem could be looked at. But I lament myself that there is, even today as we speak, an absence of clarity in the policy direction for sugar and energy. There have been plans. Those plans have suffered levels of frustration, but the policy debate which needs to come out of it is something that we have to examine more fully. And I will say why. While we will not deny that there has been some frustration arising out of legal issues, the question of energy still has to be addressed at another level, and it's that other level that I would wish to speak to. That level is the level of cogeneration. I think there are still far too many questions. Not that those questions are necessarily in the minds of the officials, either from the sugar industry or from the company that was set up to work along with this new issue. But the question has to do with what are the implications for ongoing agriculture. If in dealing with cogeneration, we are tackling the matter of the biomass, and we are looking at what we call green tamarins. I think another name was used before. I think Senator Todd spoke to it. But the problem is that in this verbiage, in these small trees, in these things that in some instances, as at the top of Waterford, these things that look like they will become huge trees, that we have to recognize that beneath them and running out from them are roots which will become massive over time. And that those roots, because they are tapping into our water supply, are going to get bigger and fatter and stronger. And that unless we are properly prepared for that particular problem, then when we wish to move from that green tamarind, I call them, I don't recall the correct name. River tamarinds, that's right, thank you very much. When we want to move from that, we may find ourselves in a situation where sugar cultivation is compromised. And if we want to increase the sugar cultivation, then there has to be greater clarity in what lands we are going to allocate for what, and how we are going to be able to address the transfer of crops, because this is not the same thing as if you're growing sugar and moving from sugar to cassava to yam to cotton and back to sugar. This is where you're growing trees, and the roots of the trees may in fact frustrate those people who are using machinery in the planting and the reaping of the sugar cane. So it would seem to me that we have to recognize that that is a very important issue, and that that issue has to be addressed, particularly since sugar is known by us to be critical for the sustainable plan which was put forward in the 90s, which was put forward 5 years ago, and which is now before the country of Barbados as the means by which we will be able to recover our sustainability, and which we would be able to use as a means of recovering our wealth and our potential to create even more wealth. A final point that I would wish to make, Madam President, is the matter of how we will better be able, in our attempt to continue to build our sugar lands and our sugar environments, how we may better be able to do upgrades in our village communities. And those people who are interested in country constituencies, those who are themselves able properly to understand what it is to make sure that we build a Barbados which is not a Barbados for some, leaving the others behind, we've got to see that whereas successive governments have shown gratitude to the agricultural builders of our nation for the work that they have done, it is still true today that some village areas have not sufficiently benefited from the task done by our forefathers. As a result of this, there is sometimes a problem of a disconnect between villages, particularly in the country area. And sometimes in that disconnect, there is the disconnect in terms of the roads. There's a disconnect, thank you, ma'am, in terms of lighting. And there is a disconnect in terms of the general connection and the general connectivity that there is between village A and village B. And we think that we have to make a greater effort in this area. For example, we have to be able to recognize the connection between the benefit that comes from that for the locals and the benefits that come from it for our tourist visitors. We ought not, one good example is this, we ought not to have our tourists and our visitors making the journey from down in Shorey Village in St. Andrew, as an example, through to the church, St. John's Parish Church, with the kinds of road problems that exist at the level that they now exist. There must be a concerted effort made to realize that not only are the villages in that area, in those areas, suffering, two constituents on one side and one constituent on this side, all involved in that particular difficulty. But we ought to be able to realize that the tourists themselves will lose the benefit of the visits that they have to the most beautiful part of the country and by extension, the most beautiful part of the world. So we have to be in a position, one senator particularly agrees with me, we have to be in a position to recognize that there is significant benefit to be had from making sure that the villages benefit from the advantages that sugar will bring, not just to the villages, but to the country as a whole and to the economy at the end of it all. Madam, I thank you very kindly.
Senator Ince, you have the floor.
Madam President, I rise in support of this resolution that's before this honorable chamber that looks at the refinancing of existing debt obligations of the government of Barbados in the amounts of $13.92 million, currency of United States dollars, underwritten by Anster Merchant Bank in relation to the sugar industry of Barbados. Madam President, it is important that we recognize what the government and this administration, the Democratic Labour Party, is undertaking. And this government outlined to the people in Barbados that we were going to restructure and diversify the sugar industry, that we were going to concentrate on what we call a cane industry. We must remember, Madam President, that sugar is a commodity. It's a traded commodity. And once you have a commodity that is traded, whether that commodity could be apples, oranges, or what, and there are alternatives that can be used as a substitute on the world market, you're going to get a decline in prices. That is the reality. Once you have alternatives and you have commodities that are traded, now over the years, we would have seen a decline in the price of sugar, despite saying that Barbados has the best sugar in the world. But let us face the fact that nothing was done really to restructure and diversify the sugar industry, despite knowing very well that the sugar industry is critical to Barbados. But what bothers me, and I have said it over and over again, Madam President, that the workers in the sugar industry did not benefit over the years from what we call this important and critical industry to Barbados. The workers of Barbados, the workers in the sugar industry, and the sugar industry is labor intensive. Despite we speak about all the mechanics and the technologies, who drive the tractors, who work in the sugar factory. My father was a sugar factory worker, I have said it in here. Worked in the quarry, worked in the sugar factory, and had it not for the BWU, and I have said it over and over again, despite persons may want to criticize what I say, I said had it not for the BWU, my father and many other persons would have died in Carrington Sugar Factory. And I make no apologies for that, and that is a fact. And growing up as a youngster, you watch your parents work from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, but yet at the end of the day, you don't see the benefits. You did not see the benefits. So had it not for the late Sir Frank Walcott and many of the other young persons he had with him at that time, Sir Roy and all, as they call them, the young militant ones, that broke the back. Yes, and Madam President, you know, when you talk to the older persons in the sugar industry, those were the persons who broke the back of what you call at the time in Barbados. You had a group called the Sugar Workers, the Sugar Producers Association, a very powerful group that ran Barbados. And that Sugar Producers Association at the time were made up of the planters, including a big conglomerate called Barbados Shipping and Trading. And many of us want to forget the role that Barbados Shipping and Trading played in the sugar industry in this country. And Madam President, it was the BWU who broke the back of that conglomerate and that powerful group. And that is how Sir Frank got the name the Heavy Roller. Talk to the persons in the industry, that is how he got the name the Heavy Roller. because he had to go there militant with his support, as I said, with Sarai and all the others who were young men at the time, and they had to be militant because you had a situation where sugar was the main sector in Barbados, producing millions of dollars, but nothing was passed back to the workers. Absolutely nothing. And over the years, Madam President, we have financed a sugar industry, a 300-year-old sugar industry, with the same management, with the same behavior. Madam President, the owners have passed on, but the ancestors and the descendants and the great-grands are still around to manage under a same management that have allowed this country, this industry to deteriorate, the sugar industry. And every time, Madam President, that the sugar industry is in trouble, whether it is the Barbados Labour Party or the Democratic Labour Party, it is government that has to take the burden of it. And let us remember that it was this same industry who almost caused the Barbados National Bank to go into receivership through the restructuring of debt, when they had to write off $40 million and then take on another $240.9 million. It is written there in the books.
What you say about books?
Written there in the financials. And who had owned all of that debt? The private sector of Barbados, who owned the sugar lands at the time. And that is what we are talking about. I am in support of financing the sugar industry, but we cannot continue this support in the way things are done. It cannot continue. Because at the end of the day, Madam President, it is the taxpayers of Barbados, who has to repay this loan. It has to be paid out of the consolidated fund, the taxes of the people of Barbados, the laborers, who the BWU and the NUPW represent. And the majority of them, as I said, in the industry, the BWU, they are the constituents, because the persons in the public service also have to pay this tax. Taxes are going to come out of their salaries. That is what it is. So when we look at the support, that is why, Madam President, I always, when I hear the unions, and I'm going to speak a lot about labor in the sugar industry, because when the unions are asking for things in the sugar industry, I have no problem with it. Because for too long, the workers in the sugar industry has been disadvantaged, and they need a voice. Was others are getting fat. There are persons, Madam President, who get fat out of the inefficiencies of government. There are persons who don't want inefficiencies to become efficient, because once the inefficiencies remain, they will continue to be overrated. And these inefficiencies that are in the industry cannot continue. We must draw the line and make some decisions. But at the end of the day, the ones who carry the burdens, the workers are the ones who carry the burden. They, Madam President, they are the ones that must benefit. They must benefit. And that hasn't been forthcoming. Yes, we have seen increases, but what? Those are the ones that must benefit. And government will continue. Both governments have financed this industry over and over and over and over. The union, the BWU, has been battling and battling and battling for years. And I hope that they will continue to battle, because this is an important sector. When we look at the rum industry and the potential for molasses, but there's also, as I said, and I'm going to repeat it, the potential of the workers. What about the potential of the workers who have carried this industry and continue to carry the sugar sector? important. And it speaks to the social obligation of government and the social obligation to those workers. They must play a part. There must be a different partnership. That's what I'm speaking about. There must be a partnership that is equitable to every player in the industry. And we must see those benefits. Madam President, the financing of the terms and conditions, Madam President, as I said, very reasonable when we consider that when you hear the comments from the financial analysts and the economists about what they perceive Barbados, and the mere fact that we are getting this at 7.95, when we consider, as some people would say, want to tell you, the 20 downgrades, that when persons are saying the country falling apart, all of these things, but we were able to secure a loan. And in fact, Madam President, if one were to look at the previous loans under the previous administration, you would see that many of those loans were at higher interest rates. So in the face of all of this, and the fact, what is important is that the government was able to negotiate this loan as a fixed, non-callable bond. A fixed rate, non-callable. If things in Barbados were that bad, and you're speaking of professional on the road, you're speaking of a merchant bank, and I say that when you are able to negotiate loans of this magnitude at lower interest rates, if things in the country, as people want to say, were falling apart, and you are able to secure financing for a sugar industry that have challenges, financing for a sugar, an industry that is challenged, you know. This is not an industry that's only profitable. This is an industry that's making losses. But you can find a merchant bank that can underwrite your challenges at 7.95, and not only that, allow you to have a fixed rate, non-callable, which means you're not going to call it within the time. But what they're saying is that if conditions change, and that is normal, but they could easily say, look, we are going to give you this loan at a variable rate. It could have easily be done. We are going to give you at a variable rate, and we are going to tie it to the performance of the bond market. And if the bond market goes up and the terms change, you're going to see maybe a 3 or 4 percentage points increase. But it says no, non-callable. And what is also important, Madam President, is when we speak to the fees of the issue. If you say fees, now the government of Barbados have a debt unit, but the debt unit don't underwrite bonds. If the debt unit don't underwrite bonds, if this money could have been written from the consolidated fund, there will be no reason going to Answer Merchant Bank. But it cannot be written from the consolidated fund or the treasury because the government do not have that capacity to do it. On the other hand, once this is underwritten, it must then be sold to other persons. This is an investment. Once Answer says other persons out there, pension funds, maybe private individuals, they want to be part of it. So how are you going to get it to them? In simple language, persons who specialize in the area must have salaries paid, wages paid, and that is how merchant banks make the money. By having what you call the professional fees, similar to doctors and lawyers. A lawyer goes to a court to bail a person out, there's a fee. As far as I know, a lawyer goes to court to represent a client on a trial, there's a fee. Doctors charge fees. Don't matter what. So the reality is that when we speak of the fees, we are speaking of professional fees because this bond must go into the portfolio of other persons. Pension funds, as I said, go into the equity funds, individuals. This is what it is about. Now, the reason why we don't trade, people ask why US dollars, and it is just a matter of protecting a depreciation in the currency. The US dollar is an international, what you call an international trade currency. It's a currency of international trade. But when you look around, you do not see a Barbados dollar and EC dollar in the basket of currencies. There are 5 baskets of currencies of the international trade, and that is the US dollar, pound sterling, the euro, Canadian dollar, and the Japanese yen. Those are the 5 baskets of currencies. So if you're going to trade, then you must trade against something else. We do not have a market in the Caribbean that would facilitate Barbados trading in EC dollars, but you do trade in EC dollars. So if you want to buy something from one of the EC territories, you can have an exchange in Barbados dollars for EC. Or when you go to Trinidad, you can have TT dollars for Barbados dollars. That already is a trading in currencies. But if you're speaking of international trade, then you know the capacity of the Barbados dollar. Because when we talk about, we can't call Japan and get a conversion and buy cars in Barbados dollars. We have to convert to US dollars. The reason why? Because the Barbados dollar is not part of the international basket of currencies, nor the EC dollar. So the whole idea of trading currencies, you can trade the US dollar against a Japanese yen, a pound sterling against a Japanese yen. You can have these type of things. But when it comes to that, the Barbados dollar is the Barbados dollar. And when you go outside of Barbados, then you have to do what you call the conversion of the Barbados dollar. So the terms and conditions within the terms and conditions are standard. Other conditions, they say to you, if things deteriorate, that is standard. Because nobody can foresee what would happen next week or the next 2 weeks. But these are normal underwriting standards. This is like insurance coverage. The underwriting insurance say to you, you must keep your facilities, your home in XYZ condition. Or if something happens, the possibility that you may not get what you want when it comes to the compensation if there's damage to your home. Because if the insurers found out that you never took the necessary action to make sure that your home is safe or protected, then you may find out that all that premium you pay over the years may come to naught. So the underwriters is just saying, look, you must continue to keep the country on track. These are guidelines to say to you, continue managing, continue to be the best managers of the economy, that further down the road, we can continue to give you loans at concessionary rates. And that is normal. It is normal, not a concern. It should not be a concern. These are the things that happen in the international financial industry. And as I said before, Madam President, that for Barbados at this time to have a bond and to refinance, that is critical, that we are refinancing existing debt. And when you look at refinancing existing debt under the conditions and be able to attract this type of interest rate on a loan for 6 years to maturity, then one can only say that it is very feasible, very reasonable, and that the government, as I have said it before, this government, this administration, this Democratic Labour Party has been managing and managing well, despite all the challenges that we face, not only in the local economy, but in the international economy. And the main fact that is for our sugar industry, that is challenged and has been challenged over the years with declining prices, high production costs, and that the underwriters can still be able to look at a sector and say, we have confidence, because that is what it is. It's a demonstration of confidence, not only in the economy, but also in the sector. Madam President, with those words, I'm obliged.
Senator Hunt, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to give my support to this resolution. And of course, I wish to say that I have just checked the Constitution of Barbados, which governs the operations of the conduct of Parliament. And until March 5th, everything that we discuss here, a debate here, is legitimate with or without an opposition. So we are on constitutional and legal grounds This is no operating in the dark or undercover to do any legitimate business in this country. Madam President, what seems to be coming out of this debate has to do with the history, both past and present, of the sugar industry. Madam President, the sugar industry has been a great contributor to the economy of Barbados. I have to say, in years gone by. And probably still to some extent, because it is a foreign exchange provider. No matter how much it costs to produce it, and no matter how much it costs that we get for it, for our production, it is still a foreign exchange benefit to the country. But, Madam President, the history of the sugar industry, as my colleague touched on just now, Senator Ince, and earlier Senator Trotman, has not been a great benefit to the workers of Barbados. The Barbados Workers Union must be congratulated for the part that they played in whatever the workers might have gained throughout the years. And I have to say that because even though he has gone, Sir Frank Walcott, he is one of the persons I had great admiration for, because I listened to him a lot, and I never at once doubted his sincerity. But, Madam President, we talk about diversification of industry in Barbados. And let me say this. When Mr. Barra of late made that statement in 1969, which some people, for their own purposes, like to play up, of not being famous or otherwise. When Mr. Barra made that statement in 1969 at King George Park, May Day, it ain't what he said then, it is what he said before. He said about our women folk as beasts of burden, with large bundles of cane on their heads, nowhere to do their private business, in the fields owned by the plantocracy in this country, that get all the finance and all the money and all the benefits out of that sugar industry. The same way the grandchildren, the same way the children to be educated. And when the industry started to falter, it was the government and the taxpayers of Barbados that had to hold up that industry. And doing it up to today. Black people were like slaves. And when Mr. Barr made his comments about not seeing a plain girl in Barbados, he proceeded with how our women folk were like beasts of burden. The other woman name was Bowman, she died. The largest bundle of cane overseas, thought went for the crane. Miss Bowman used to move cane, because I had a lot of little private cane grounds around Bank Hall and so on. And when you see that woman put a bundle up on her head, you think it half a whole horse cart. She's gone now. She had to go at some time. And that is not being, I'm not stretching the truth. That's a fact of life. I worked in the insurance industry from 1968 till about 1972. My daddy was in the country. And when you see how those people was able to pay $275 and $280 and so on, because of course it was that weekly insurance at the time. Now people saying when they purchase insurance, they send it to the bank, they send it to the credit union. But of course, you had to collect the premiums on those days. And I would see their pay a packet, not necessarily during crop time, I would see their pay a packet $14 and $15. I wonder how this will survive. But of course, things that they had, people who got to buy now town of vegetables, they probably could have gotten over the little plot that they had. But there were no great benefits, because even when they get the crop money, they had to carry it down to plantation, limit Barbados, ship and trade again, and in Mannings, to buy lumber, to build their homes. And they were on chattel land, chattel houses, on plantation land. So who were the beneficiaries of the sugar industry? The white plantation owners. So anybody talking about harking on what Mr. Barr said? The hotel industry was developed under the Democratic Labour Party. I work in her industry. I had my first motor car, and the first player got it to rob a bank. 10% plus salary. Was able to buy my little Anglia Ford. And people working in the sugar industry for years and all are going to get probably the horse car. And how Mr. Frank Walker named, Sir Frank Walker of late, was drive through the matters. What Senator Trotman said is true. That man had to have security. You know, a lot of people don't know about that. You don't know, a lot of people don't know about that. Over that rainfall in 1963. In 1958, Campbell and members of the Democratic Labour Party had to march sugar workers up to see the governor. And you know what the people in the Barbados Labour Party said and the Conservative Party? Look, you can't all them people there to go and mash down the governor carpet. That is what they said about, look, I don't think that sometimes we understand what we have gone through in this country, you know. I don't think sometimes we understand the work. But the Democratic Labour Party, they started off by allowing free secondary education for the same children of the workers in the plantation. You know why? Because they did not want their children to come along and work how hard as they did. Don't attack the Democratic Labour Party. Don't attack our bar of late. Don't attack them and children, because they have transformed this country, opened all of those industries. Nobody heard them. And I'll tell you something too. In my research, I didn't extend it in the debate on Monday, but the first capacitor, I think they call it that was made, wasn't in Barbados, but we contributed to the industry. Because with those little industries that were set down at the Bridgetown Harbour. We were part of that history to produce the first computer. This is what they call diversification, or trying to move the people from the plantation, working for the white people, around the blacks in trouble. What did their children and grandchildren gotten? And that is why free secondary education was introduced in 1963. So that those children could have gone on, stand up to this government. But that's all right, that's democracy. But when Mr. Barrow made the statement, he perceived it about our fathers and mothers, not my parents really, but those who had to work in the sugar fields, little or nothing. So Barr's statement was not made in isolation. It was not. It was in 1969 at King George V Park, May Day. If you want the facts, come to me. Come to me. I'm not going to allow anybody to attack the Democratic Labour Party and the historical contribution they made to this country. They're not perfect. If they were perfect, they'll still be living. But those of us who are still around can defend it. I won't take that from anybody who may speak on the matter. I was around then and know about it. And the Democrat Labour Party transformed this country. And it always seems that whenever this country is in trouble, the Democrat Labour Party comes to the occasion. Comes to the occasion. To rescue them, of course. Comes to the occasion, but to rescue them, of course. So, we have to clearly understand the world is not waiting us. We got to move with them. And some of the comments I hear, you know, was interesting. All these alternatives that are promised to people, I really don't want to see it proved otherwise. Because personally, there are others like me, but personally, I don't want to see the Barbados Labour Party get back in office in this country, not in due haste. I really don't want to see it. That might sound biased, but it's true too. So I don't want to prove that what they're saying to prove them wrong, because I don't want to prove them wrong, because we don't want them back there. But to attack the Democratic Labour Party that transformed this country. Look at the hotel industry. And even sometimes in that sector, they complain no matter what you do. You complain. All the concessions, all the development on the hotel industry has been a result of the Democratic Labour Party's policies and programs. But still complain. We complain about sandals. I brought into this chamber with my brother from Toronto sent down to be in the Toronto Star. Two full-page, correct term, of an advertisement as far as sandals in Barbados is concerned. Who paid for it? The government of Barbados didn't pay for it, sandals paid for it. In 2016, they opened in 2015. In 2015, the persons they accommodated alone at their hotel with over 20,000 people. One hotel. Based on their own promotion. And let me tell you something. Sandals have brought a lot to this country. Free advertising. Couldn't pay for it. You're looking out in the channels and you will see. But you know something? We want things free. People are to invest in Barbados with no returns. It don't work that way. It don't work that way. And I still feel about making that letter a document where I was a threatened. I still feel so. I ain't got much time to do it. Might do it by Friday too, if I feel the same way I feel today. Because as you speak against a certain sector in this country, they feel you can't, they can say what they feel about you. I am not one of those people that's scared. Not at all. I have seen where this country come from. I have seen where this country came from. I've seen it. I have lived to see the transformation. Barbados not over, we just over 50 years, 51 years as a nation. But of course, we were over 300 and something years, but where the real benefits came. The rights of 37 was only, the rights of 37 was only about what, 80 something years ago? I think it was. 63 plus 18. Only, that's where the real, I know what I had to do. People had to fight. Brick windows, the usual thing. I didn't even call that a riot. Because it really, that was just an insurrection. That's a little upheaval. I wouldn't even call that a riot. But people were hungry. Baked grain rice, a potato. All of that our people had to go through. And Mr. Barra come along and transform this country. And that is why the Barbados workers union must be fair to them. They're not like certain behaviors of them now. But they have transformed an association with the Barbados Workers Union. And I said it here again, I say it again. 2 weeks before Sir Frank died, he came over at government headquarters where I was stationed. And we had a chat with his wife, she was driving him. 2 weeks later, he had gone. And I was glad that at least I'm one of the persons, the last person to have seen him and spoke with him. Certainly not. Certainly not. And I'm sure you saw me in the walk for his 100th anniversary as well. A lot of people that should have been there were not there. I was one of them just a couple of years ago that went in his the 100th anniversary of his birth. Not of his death, of his birth. And therefore, we have to sing the praises of those who have made great contributions to this country. It is really interesting when we look back. And I always say, God, look back, because nobody don't know about the fight forward. They don't know about that. You're going down the road, you don't know if you're going to swing out, divert and go through some gap or some road because you don't know. But we have to look back and credit those who have made great contributions to our country. That's a fact of life. That is a fact of life. I remember with the statements that were made when Barbados was about to get independence in 1966. I was then working at Sanitary Laundry on one of their laundry vans. 1967, I remember that we had a depot in Bay Street, not too far from Lorry Dash. Going in there to collect the clothes. I don't know many white people, I must say that. But this short white man, I don't know 10 white people. Popular ones maybe like Seal and them kind of people. I don't know the white people. Because obviously we're in different categories. I can't tell you 10 names and say you know that body. I just see them, and that's a fact. But anyway, here's this short white man who was off-roading something out of the van and was carrying a lorry dash. And another white man, hey, you back here in Barbados? You say, yeah, boy, this is this place in the world, they done with that. You only have about 6 months in the back of the building. Never forget it. Right there in front of the lorry dash. Huh? The man said, well, you back in Barbados? He said, yeah, man, this is the best place in the world. I done with that. I don't know if you went to New Zealand or Australia or where, but you're back here. All of those were the ones that ran out because of the text to say that Mr. Barrow will do this thing. So, you know, I've seen it before my very eyes, the transformation of Barbados' economy. And those changes of developing the hotel industry, which I can speak as one of the former workers, all those industries down there, girls coming out, thousands of them you see coming out on the Harbour Road. And we had grandparents and parents and so on that were working in the cane fields, cutting cane, loading cane. We're going to get at the end of the week. And when they get it during the crop season, they had to go and spend it at the lumber yards, the plantations limited, and the Mannings and all of those kind of people. They get it here, and they go and spend it there. They even used to buy a fridge, but they had no current to plug it in. Things were moving fast. But don't talk about the rainfall money. Don't talk about that at all. Because the suggestions made by Sir Frank, those people walk about and scandal that man, saying he wants to steal the money for himself. He's a thief. I remember all of that. I remember the meetings on Empire Pasture. I remember them well. Oh, Fairchild Street. I could come out there once. I'll tell you about Empire Pasture, the next door to me. So, what I'm saying is that even though I could understand my fellow senator of the other side, a little concerned, Senator Watson, who's made some interesting points here. Not me, because they don't quote me. I'm not a favorite. I am not a favorite of the media. They probably think that I say is too much and too deep for a lot of them don't understand. So I don't worry about them. I don't worry about them. But I see the right excellent said newspapers couldn't bug him and they can't sell him. They can't bug me nor they can't sell me. I say what I know and I say what I experience. So let me take this opportunity, Madam President, that I want to give credit to the CBC for carrying the broadcast and being here as members, and elsewhere, getting out the message to the people. I want to give credit to the Barbados Advocate. I want to give credit sometimes to VOB. And for getting the message out to the people from the parliaments here. Those who don't, may the Lord have mercy on them. But I wish to say that I'm one that will speak in this country of what I know, what I experience, and not what I pass and hear somebody sing. I am not into that. I have been around this business too long. I feel extremely grateful up to this point of what have taken place in Barbados. They're going to have challenges. I don't know if people expect that we all of a sudden be born in this perfect world and nothing will happen, and only yet some other people got the answer. We are fortunate in this country. I ain't hear nobody lining up by the airport. The 13 planes that was seen there was bringing in people. They weren't taking out anybody. People, I haven't heard people like to go to Jamaica, to Trinidad, to Guyana, nothing of that sort. But they line up to come here. Even though some of the vices and some of the things that we see and we reading about in the paper is a little distressing, but that is what we sign on to. That is what we sign on to. That they're bringing all of the behavior from elsewhere and displaying it in Barbados, stabbing up one another, just calling at each other from the same country, So all that takes place elsewhere, we are now getting in Barbados. But that's the name of the game. And until it changes, so will it be. So, Madam President, I just had those few words to say, and I support the resolution. Thank you very much.
Senator Carmichael, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I promise you I'll be very short in my remarks, and I had not planned to speak on the resolution, although I'm very much in support of it. But after experiencing the stimulating and encouraging comments across the floor today, I felt that if I didn't say something, I might have felt a little sad and left out. And I thought, Madam President, that you would allow me, therefore, to add a few remarks. And my remarks will be more of a reflective nature, and they'll be very short. But what is very evident is that, like any loan resolution, and we never think of loan resolutions in this sense, even though we speak a lot about them. But today, we did think about it. Loan resolutions are very much about the future. They're about the present, but they're also very much about the future. And what interested me so much in the debate, and I refer to the contribution in particular of Sir Roy, which I listened to very carefully, was in respect of how he recognized the importance of agriculture to Barbados in the foreseeable future. Because, you know, we have all recognized what agriculture has done for us in terms of its benefits, but also in terms of its scars. And make no mistake about it, that was very evident today, and but we focused on the future. And so Roy focused on the future, and he emphasized points such as how do we see the future connectivity between village A and B? These are things that are pregnant with meaning and with thought, and things we really must address. But I come back and I say it was a resolution of the future, but it very much was a cultural resolution, Madam President, because I come back to the famous Cane Blade speech, which Sir Roy introduced and contextualized it. And I say that because we so often hear about the Cane Blade speech. And when we hear about it, it's very often not in a lecture hall, neither is it in a parliamentary or a Senate chamber. It's normally more on the hustings. And this Cane Blade speech is always taken in isolation. And let me say, Madam President, that I thought for the benefit of the chamber, and as I said in my last contribution, since we now are on the wireless and we go everywhere, but for the benefit of the nation, it was good that Senator Sir Roy was able to contextualize the Cane Blade speech, and our friend Senator Hunt was able to not only contextualize it, but indeed to elucidate the speech itself. And let me say that I think we're all indebted to him that he could remember, not just remember the date, but remember the occasion and the full context of that speech. Because it's possibly one of the most important speeches that the Right Excellent Earl Walton Barrow has ever made. And I have carefully studied all of his speeches, all of them. I mean, not every one, but most of them. But that was a very important speech, and I'm delighted that we were able, as a group, and as we come to the end of this Senate session, the full session, that we were able to at least, in an interesting kind of way, immerse ourselves in that speech and to understand it. Because even though that speech was a 1969 speech, it comes back to what I said at the beginning, Madam President. That speech will always remain a speech of the future, because it's an aspirational speech. And that's, I had to say. I say that I wanted also, Madam President, to place on record my personal thanks to Answer Merchant Bank and Consol Finance's co-arranger, because, and this is not something that would typically be said, but Answer Merchant Bank over the last many years, since Answer Merchant Bank has been around, has been very thoughtful to the people of Barbados. And their loans, they are in the business of giving loans, so their loans are done in a business-like way, but the loans have always been development focused and development understood. So that is something I wanted to place on record. The lead gentleman at that institution who plays such a big role, I'm learning from other colleagues, has not given me the authority to state his name, so I won't state them, but many people know who Mr. Hill may be. I say maybe. So I wanted to also make that comment as well, Madam President, to place on record that. I wanted to say also, Madam President, just if I may muse, I think the fact that we have done so well recently over the last many years with our growing relationship with China, I think it's something that we must never take for granted. Because I myself see a world where the Chinese renminbi will take on even greater prominence than it has at the moment. I don't think that it will displace the dollar, and I say that based on the Japanese experience, which after the 1997-98 crisis, took that threat away from the yen taking over the role of the dollar. I'm not suggesting there will be a crisis in China, not at all. But I think the way that Japan, with its yen, has played a more balancing role in the East. I think that we have an opportunity where, as China's renminbi gets stronger, it will not seek to take over the dollar, but will play a much more balancing role in the way that the yen has played over the years. So I say, again, I'm looking to the future, Madam President. I think the way that we have placed ourselves we have some Chinese loans in, and we have a good relationship. I think the way that we have placed ourselves in that respect also places us in a good position for the future. So that is the future, Madam President. I just wanted to say a few reflections on the future in terms of this resolution, which coming before us in the closing stages is interesting, and we're delighted to be able to participate in it at so many levels of analysis, if you will, where we had the cultural element and where we had the finance element, but we're always focused on the future. And Madam President, as you know, the future, or I should rather put it the other way, Madam President, the present is always the future. I'm obliged. Thank you.
Senator Boyce, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank colleagues for the contributions that they have made to this discussion that we've had today, largely on the sugar cane industry and almost tangentially on the finance and the loan terms. There have been one or two things that have made me want to be brusque in my replying comments, but since Senator Roy was so wonderful and so full, his praise of that eastern part of the country, from which he comes, and from which, in a manner of speaking, Senator Royal comes and Senator Fraser, in a manner of speaking, though they are really big inlands. And where Senator Garner, and myself truly come from, like Sir Roy, I am going to be very easy in my comments. So, Madam President, before I get very easy, let me just say one thing. I listened to Senator Hunt, and there may be some people in this country, even some of my generation, who think that he may be talking, he might have dreamt up some of that stuff. He has not told the half of it. He has not told the half of it for those of us who actually live through those conditions. I tell you, my family did not work on the estates in the cane fields. My family were small landowners. My mother, my father, all my uncles and my aunts. But they all grew sugar cane. And in St. Andrew, yields were high, no mechanization, all that. When the children of those families got jobs in town after getting educated, our parents could not afford to grow canes anymore because they could not afford to pay the labor low as it was then. And when he talks about having to pay money for the manure and the lumber and so on, he didn't talk about all the roofs that had the water coming through them, or any such thing, or the absence of latrine facilities and bathroom facilities and so on. He has not told the half. And we have sometimes I have to back away from it so that I do not get myself too upset on the matter. Life has to go on. Well, Madam President, let me get back to the substance of this resolution. One or two little corrections, or little explanations. The term sheet does put a number of conditions that are subject to the arranger, and particularly in terms of information, supply of information, and that sort of thing. That is quite natural in all these agreements with bondholders. The issuer, the arranger, and the bondholders do tend to have some exclusive rights, sole rights in terms of information and so on that they can require from you. And this is what that had to do about. The terms also include that if there's a downgrade, you increase the interest rate on the coupon. But it is very specific that if that downgrade occurs before the execution of the loan, that is when the downgrade, that is when the increase in the interest rate comes. So it isn't a case where you've got the bond issued and then a downgrade comes and you have to pay additional interest rate. So if it happens before, then you pay. And that is quite natural because your credit conditions have changed, your risk has changed, and therefore the lender has a right to make those changes. If your credit rating improves, you have the room not to go with that borrower. Sorry, not to go with that lender, but to go to some other lender and say to him, my credit rating has improved, ease off those interest rates a little bit, and if he doesn't wish to, you go to somebody else and you get the interest rate. So that is not a worry that I have on that one, but it's right. If it happens before you execute your loan, then you have to pay the additional interest rate charge. But so that's fairly safe at this stage. Now, Madam President, I want to also just clarify, hopefully, well, some of my colleagues have done it before, I just want to say it myself. This notion that we have that the agricultural sector has not been supported by the governments. You know, there's an agronomic research station that in St. George Groves. And that is one of the, I believe, one of the best research stations in the Caribbean and in the world. And it's paid for. Government contributes substantially to that. The Ministry of Agriculture has, in it, I believe, more PhDs, more persons with PhDs, doctorates, than any other ministry around here, in Barbados. Paid for by the. You haven't get there yet. You all may think so, but you are way behind in terms of doctorates. Madam President, what Senator Ince said about the rescue of the industry in 1992 is perfectly correct. But what a lot of people don't, a lot of people heard that amount, almost $200 million back in 92. What they don't understand, if that had been allowed to fester throughout the financial system, you would have such contagion that you would have had a severe financial crisis, domestic financial crisis as well. And ever since, before then, government was supporting and guaranteeing the borrowings of the sugar industry, before then. And since then, government has each year put in close to, I must remember a couple of years, in 2009, I think it was about $80 million that year. And it's roughly been run about that for almost every year. Close to 1% of GDP. And we talk about the contribution to tourism, but that is as much as contribution to tourism that they've had in the sugar industry. And before tourism had incentives, duty-free on equipment and supplies, agriculture had duty-free on equipment and supplies ever since. But agriculture is very risky business. very risky business. So I can understand why you have that. And I can understand why people keep calling for more and more incentives. But the fact of the matter is that only so much the government can do. I also try my hand at a little farming. Rather. The lady of the house raised her hand at the gentleman at the farming, and I supply the capital. But it works very well. It works very well. But it is very risky business. And so I don't begrudge that the farmers get the support, but we have to move away from this notion that the agricultural sector gets no support from the government. It gets excellent support. It has got excellent support right through the years. And we should recognize that. Now, Madam President, let me talk a little bit about the energy connection with the sugarcane industry. I'm going to speak on that more so than the other areas because you mentioned the falernum, the fancy molasses, and so on, and the dark sugars and so on, all things that have been contemplated in the restructuring of the industry. Because they recognize that the old bulk sugar really was not going to cut it for you. You really weren't going to make money from that. But the energy part of it. And yes, the original thing had been they had the fuel cane, and then they looked at the sugar tamarind, and I believe that there's research going on. There isn't any big acreage plan, some research is going on to test the specific things that Sir Roy warned about. Which species have what level of invasiveness and that sort of thing, because we recognize what that problem is. There's also a lot of work going on, as Sir Henry mentioned, in cane grass. And I remember meeting with the farmers when they came and spoke to me about cane grass as a feedstock for generations, and I gave them my support and introduced them to some financial institutions that would help them with some funds for the testing. And that is why I very believe that you may well get, you'll get a lot of mileage off the cane grass going as a biomass source that we're going to use. But that is why we want to go that route with the biomass because one, it gives you the power, but also it gives you a chance to put biomass to plant up a lot of areas in the country which are not now planted up. So you will do the biomass, but not at the expense of the sugar you want to do. Because the sugar is necessary for the rum and the molasses and the juice and so on and so forth. But then you use a lot of those lands that are not now in cultivation. You'll bring them back in cultivation by using the cane grass or the river tamarind if the research shows well on the river tamarind. So we wouldn't have this threat to the sugarcane lands. We've also, Madam President, had discussions with the people in town planning about the positioning of wind turbines in some of the cane fields. Once again, it will add some constant source of income to them without reducing the level of production of sugarcane and sugar. And the Light and Power Company has certainly done a project in St. Lucie where they have used solar photovoltaic system, and I believe that they're running sheep beneath that. Yes. So that you're trying to combine the energy, renewable energy, or alternative energy with some food farming, and to give us that kind of resilience in our food supply, as well as resilience in our energy supply. So, and that is really part of how we perceive the future of the agricultural sector. Not only this is for cane, but we want to use the technology as well and push into the other areas of food production. This one's concerned with the sugarcane industry, and that's how we're conceptualizing it. Now, hopefully, we can get over the hurdles that have presented themselves and get this thing moving forward, this initiative, because we need it to be able to bring our lands back in production We need it to be able to keep on earning the foreign exchange that we earn, and to keep those people employed in that industry who are now there. And they've got some very good skills too in that industry. You know, sometimes we don't think, when we think of sugar workers, we don't think of the skills that they have, but some of those people in the factories have got tremendous skills which can be used in so many other places in this country. But, Madam President, one other thing I think, at least one thing I want to bring attention to your attention. You know, there was a Barbadian scientist. I think he went to school at the School of Film Members of the Senate. Dr. Hollingsworth is his name? Hollingsworth, right? Dr. Hollingsworth, Commonwealth School. A very good scientist who had quite a few patents involving the use of the sugar cane. He has died now, and I think that his wife and his widow and some other people are trying now to continue the effort to help to commercialize some of that, have some work commercialized. But I mention that because I would expect that as you develop the sugarcane industry, you will want also to move over to see to what extent you can commercialize some of these inventions, some of these patents, and give us additional room to create jobs for our technically skilled persons that are coming out of the university. So we're hopeful that we can get that to happen. Madam President, I would not want us either to sing the praises of those who have promoted agriculture in this country in recent times and exclude our former senator, now the Barbados Consul General to Toronto, the former Senator Hainsley Benn, who did yeoman service in the industry, both for sugar and non-sugar agriculture. And I want us to remember him. And he still has that keen interest in supporting all the work that goes on. Now, they tell me as well that part of the focus on this industry going forward is on more use of science. Part of the project has always consisted of looking at the agronomy of the industry, so as to get the yields up. Obviously, the yields go up, the costs come down. You use less land, so the competition for land resources gets to be more balanced. And I understand that a lot of the work is going on is just that work on agronomy to make sure that the varieties are right for us, that the agronomy is right, and that we can get much higher yields. I believe that they're trying to aim to get it to double the yields, or treble them in some instances, to be able to make sure that we can have an industry which can be sustainable on its own for a long time. So, Madam President, I think that deals pretty much with what I think came out of this discussion. The Cane Blades matter has been dealt with, so I don't need to deal with this again, other than to say that to those people who were close to the Cane Blades, you understood very clearly what Right Excellent Alvaro was talking about. Madam President, I wish to move that this resolution do now pass. I thank you.
Question is that this resolution do now pass. Honorable Senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Accordingly, this resolution has now passed.
Order number 1. In the name of Senator Jepta Ince, Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, move the second reading of the Excise Tax Validation of Tax Bill 2018.
Senator Ince, you have the floor.
Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of the excise tax validation of Tax Bill 2018. Madam President, this is a simple and straightforward matter. It relates to the budgetary proposals on June 15th, 2015, and it took effect from August 1st, 2015, and this was where the tax was imposed, a 10% excise tax on carbonated soft drinks, juice drinks, sports drinks, fruits, juices, other on the imported side, and also products of like kind and quality on produced locally. And what was exempt from the taxes were those that have what we call intrinsic sugars. Madam President, that was against the background of the calls from both the Medical Association and other interest groups in Barbados, other persons of civil society who were concerned about the consumption of sweet drinks. And I was saying to my Senate colleagues that when we grew up as children, we enjoyed sweet drinks also. You know, you enjoyed at that time it was the 12-ounce bim at the 10-ounce price, if you remember that ad. And then you enjoy the Point Juicy with a cheese cutter, or then you have the Martiniere, and you enjoy that with what you call a dagoud, a piece of ham and cheese and a sweet bread, and you had the coconut bread. But the environment changed over time, and what we were getting at the time, it was for us. But what I seem to recognize is that the sweet drinks we call now were really sweet drinks. Sweet drinks, when we speak of it, they were definitely sweet. So, you know, as a result of the calls of the government, you know, they had to do something as a deterrent. If you were to look at the healthy lifestyles, and for years there were members of the medical fraternity that were calling for this change. And recently there are even members of the medical fraternity is now saying to government that we should increase the taxes. Some are saying that the taxes should be as much as 40%. You know, some are saying 40%, because it is really a problem among our young persons with the increase of diabetes and the other health issues pertaining to the excess use of sugar. So that's why I'm saying, Madam President, that is the validation is simple, simple, straightforward, and I beg that this be read a second time.
Senator Fraser, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I shall not long delay this honourable chamber, but I do wish to take the opportunity of saying that I entirely support this. But it is very sad that the recommendation which came out of the WHO and PAHO and our own National Non-Communicable Chronic Disease Commission, led by Sir Trevor Hassel, and the Chronic Disease Research Centre and myself, was for a 20% and not a 10%. And the point being that a change of this kind, when you're dealing with very small individual sums, has to be significant to make a difference. Now, for a $4 drink, 10% is 40 cents. And most Barbadians now don't concern themselves with any coinage less than a silver dollar. People literally ignore the dimes and the nickels and the 25-cent pieces. And therefore that 40 cent increase, according to the feedback I have had from 2 supermarkets and others that I deal with, banks themselves, the marketing people there, and so on, it would not appear that there has been much of an impact on consumption, even though I understand from the reports in the press that there has been a yield of some, I think $8 million was mentioned in the tax. Well, obviously that $8 million, Madam President, is very useful. And as Senator Ince said, if the suggestion of 40% were made, then 4 times 8 would be $32 million, and that would be even more useful. But ever since the recommendation for a 20% increase was made, and only a 10% increase was made, the Caribbean Wellness Society, the NCD Commission, I, Sir Trevor, and others have said, we now need to add 20% on top. Now, I know it takes some time quite often for validation of certain things to happen. the validation of the $25 million loan to the hospital when the board was introduced more than a decade ago was only validated, I think, a year or two ago. And this is therefore comparatively quick for validation, relatively compared to that. But I would like to think, Madam President, and that's where I've taken this opportunity of saying this publicly, I would like to think that we can now make a 20% addition, we can improve the government coffers, and we might have a significant impact on the consumption of soft drinks by young people, especially children. Madam President, when I was a kid, I only remember one fat boy at my school. He was really an exception to the rule. Now, Dr. Pamela Gaskin, and I haven't asked her permission to call her name, and so perhaps I shouldn't, but in the work that we've done on the... In the work that we have done, and I'll withdraw the name for the record if you wish, in the work that we have done looking at school children's anthropometric indices, what we demonstrated in the data that we collected looking at secondary school children, and we sampled boys and girls from ages 11 through to 16 in the 5 classes, classes 1 to 5, in 4 secondary schools, 3 mixed schools of different, should I say, academic reputation and classification by the Ministry of Education, and the all-girls school for interest, just to separate that. And we looked at some 500 and plus school children in those ages, a random sample that was representative across the age groups and with approximately equal numbers of the boys and girls. And what was dramatically demonstrated at that time, Madam President, and in subsequent studies, was the prevalence of overweight and obesity. You can see it on the street, and you can see it in the classroom. But it actually shocked us when we saw it, because there's very comparatively little obesity among the boys who remain physically active throughout their school life, by and large. But the girls cease to be physically active by and large, with the exception of the famous Springer Memorial, which does so well at athletics and sports and some of the other schools. The girls, relatively speaking, the majority, cease to be physically active. And the studies that have been done in terms of behavior in the schools confirm this, and it conforms to the tremendously high prevalence of overweight and obesity, especially in our young girls. And this is a major health problem, because we are seeing, our pediatricians tell us, we are seeing an increase in the incidence of maturity onset diabetes in our adolescent girls, which we should not be seeing and which was never seen in the past. So, Madam President, all of the calls for the NCD Commission, by the NCD Commission, and the calls by the Caribbean Wellness Society, which conforms to the recommendations of PAHO and WHO over the last 20 years, and our studies at the Chronic Disease Research Center, which demonstrate an approximate doubling of the prevalence of overweight and of obesity, to the point where we lead the Caribbean just behind the Bahamas. You may have heard, Madam President, the famous slogan, "It's better in the Bahamas." Well, it's also bigger in the Bahamas. And they lead in terms of the obesity figures. And the difference there is that both the men and the ladies have this tremendously high prevalence of obesity. It's followed pretty closely by the British Virgin Islands prior to the hurricane, and Barbados. We're close up there, well ahead of countries like Jamaica and St. Lucia, which have a lower GDP and have much more physical activity. Terrain is different, and their reliance on tourism is different. And the point really made is that one of the ripple effects of our dependence on tourism is the fact that in a service industry, physical activity of the population as a whole goes right down. So that the physical activity of our population shows really rather sad figures. Less than 50% of our population takes part in any physical activity other than walking to their car or the bus stop or walking around their workplace. And so, Madam President, this is an extremely serious problem. And I therefore use this forum to make a plea, while approving this bill, that we should forthwith immediately look towards legislation that will increase it by a further 20%, which we can expect both to help the coffers and to make a difference to the calorie consumption. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President, I recognize the comments of Senator Fraser, and government would be examining how best we can deal with an issue like this. But what I must say is that Barbados took the lead, and as a result of social media, you know, things that we do now go to all parts of the world. And back then, the United States, also some states in the United States took action and placed a higher tax on this area of drinks, as well as the UK and some other countries. And reference was made to Barbados. So that is important, Madam President. But as I said before, we must pay attention to our health issues. The whole idea of obesity cannot be taken lightly. And, you know, we must look at what we eat. I always believe exercise is very important in whatsoever you do. You can have the best diet in the world, but then you must have a little exercise. And I think with the electronic age, we have changed. And as a result of the increase in motor cars, you know, I try to walk places. But nowadays, it seems if you want to park our car right on the doorstep and just get out of the car, go to the house or go to where, and then whenever you're ready to leave, the car must be right there. Those are some of the things. And then the environment with the children has changed a lot. When we look at, there are not that many play areas. We grew up in a time when there was a pasture next door. You grew up in a district, and after school you would go and have some activity, whether it is football, whether it is cricket, and then the after school activities also. That is the type of environment. It has changed so much that the children now spend more time in front of the television or playing electronic games. And then you look at the work schedule of parents. So these are the things that must be taken into consideration. And as I said, we look forward to a better Barbados. Madam President, I beg you now leave the chair. Yes, I beg that this bill be read a second time. I want to be in a hurry.
Question is that this bill be now read for the second time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Accordingly, this bill is now read for the second time.
Madam President, I beg you now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself to committee for further consideration of this bill.
Question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, the ayes have it. Accordingly, I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolves itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Deputy President, I beg to move Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those honourable senators against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those honourable senators against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg you now report to Her Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to Her Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye.
Those honorable senators against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
His Honor has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Madam President, I beg to move this bill be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be now read for the third time. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, the bill has now been read for the third time.
Madam President, I beg to move this bill do now pass and be cited. The Excise Tax Validation of Tax Act 2018.
Question is that this bill do now pass and be so cited. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, the bill has now passed and shall be so cited.
Madam President, I beg to move that this sitting be suspended until 5:15.
Question is that this sitting be now suspended until 5:15 p.m. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, this sitting is now suspended until 5:15 p.m.